You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Yes, indeed. Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku. Tonight we're going to have a little story time in honor of African Liberation Day. I think it's now known as Africa Day. It used to be known as African Liberation Day. It had another name too. Now it's Africa Day, right? Founded by Kwame Nkrumah. So in celebration of that, we're going to read some stories, some African myths and legends. Before I get into it, I just want to say, I saw it pass my screen today. I saw Olympian Lee Evans, one of the brothers that has the iconic image of raising the fist on the medal stand in 1968. I saw that he passed away. So rest in power to that brother, Lee Evans. All right. Before I go any further, just a reminder that this show is a part of a podcast network. There are other shows on the network I do invite you guys to also listen to.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. So make sure to check out the other shows on KWAZ Radio. In the chat room, the chat had some action even before I went live. NYC Sports Archive says, greetings, family. Black excellence says, Black first, always, forever, and to infinity, to the infinity power. Kevin K42 says, Black first, family. He also says, pure symbolism today. From Al Charlatan. Asians get a bill pass with protected class and money. We get the scammer and some politician kneeling F them fools. I get it. Kim here goes on to say, but this is a new dawn. The bootlicks and the sellout politicians are getting called out and soon ostracized. NYC Beauties is here saying, power to the Black melanated people of the world. We are all we got. F everyone else. Us against the world. I agree. Revolutionary Matron is here saying, greetings to everyone. Peace to Revolutionary Matron. Kevin Care 42 says, rest in peace, warrior. All right, speaking of Mr. Lee Evans. KW Don 7 is passing through. He says, greetings, we'll listen to the playback. I appreciate you passing by all the same. I really do appreciate that, man. That's a good feeling right there. So so we're gonna read some African myths and stories. I haven't done this in a while, and again, I'm doing this in honor of African Liberation Day or Africa Day, and the reason why I decided to do it was because I was working on the African Center curriculum, right, which will eventually be the Pan-African Center curriculum. And I was going through a story breakdown that I did before, one of these same African myths and legends. And I said, today will be a good day in honor of Africa Day. Let's gather around as family and let's take in a couple of stories here, all right? So we'll do about an hour worth of stories right? If you guys want this book, join the Discord. It should be up. If it's not up, ask me for it. I'll gladly pass it on. All right. Okay, so let's start off. First story is called 7 Magic Birds. There was once, so they say, a Zulu chief who sat day after day gazing sadly into the distance. 7 of his sons had gone to prove their manhood, and all had disappeared beyond the cliffs of the falling goats where cannibals live. Only the youngest boy was left, but though he was strong and seemed clever, he could not talk. No one had ever heard him speak. Old Mbata, the wisest Induna, who had advised his chief for years, wondered how to bring happiness back to him. He watched and waited and listened. And one day he approached the grieving chief and said to him in Kosi, "Lord, your youngest son has been trying to tell me something. Early in the mornings he has pulled at my arm and pointed out towards the mountains where his brothers went. But each time my old legs moved too slowly, and by the time I had arrived, there was nothing to see. But today I saw what had excited him. 7 birds perched on the fence of the cattle corral." "What is so strange about birds?" asked the chief. "These birds were like none other," Mbata explained. "They were bright, green with waving plumes. They seemed unafraid when the boy was near, but they flew away when I came nearer. Then they circled around my head before they flew off towards the cliffs of the falling goats. It would seem to me that they are magic birds." The chief's eyes brightened. "Have they come to comfort me for the loss of my sons? If that should be so, then I will reward you with 7 of my fattest cattle. These magic birds must be caught. Send 7 boys after them at dawn tomorrow. They will surely catch them." So the boys were chosen, and the chief's youngest son showed by signs that he insisted on being one of the 7. Though Mbata was worried to risk the life of the chief's one remaining son, he knew too that the boy had to prove his own bravery for himself. Like his brothers, he had to prove his manhood. "Go and find these birds," ordered the chief. "Do not let me see your faces again until you return with them. Here are assages for you to take with you." And to his son he gave a special assage of his own. Sure enough, next morning, the strange green birds appeared again. The chief watched with Mbata at his side as the 7 boys followed the 7 birds across the veld and out of sight. The beautiful birds led them far into the wild bush country, past the cliffs of the fallen goats and over a great river. There the boys stopped to gather twigs and rushes to make cages for the birds they hoped to catch. The next morning, the birds led them up the steep forested mountains on the farther bank. By the 3rd evening, the birds beat their green wings more slowly. They were tired. The chief's son crept ahead of the other boys and made his way silently towards one of the birds which had perched on a thorn bush. Triumphantly, he sprang forward and grabbed the long, shining tail feathers, just as the poor, exhausted bird tried to float out of his reach. Following his example, each of the other boys stalked and caught a bird for himself. When they gathered together beside the cages, they were all chattering with excitement. At last, shouted the chief's son joyfully, and suddenly the other boys realized that the boy had found the power to speak. They rejoiced greatly with him, and they gave him a new name, for that is the Zulu way, calling him Kulumi, which means speak. "Our task is won," he cried happily. "Tomorrow we can take our birds and my new voice back to my father. Let us start back towards home at once." Sorry about that. They hurried down the mountain slopes, but soon it was night, and they did not know where they were. They stumbled on through the forest, clutching their precious cages until Kulumi saw the light of a fire. He led them cautiously towards it, but no one was there and an empty hut stood beside. The place seemed safe enough, so they lay down inside the hut and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, Kulumi woke. The fire was out and the hut was dark. Then he heard a voice muttering, "The meat smells good. I shall call my brothers." And Kulumi knew with fear that they were in the hut of a cannibal. He woke his friends silently and led them far and fast through the darkness. But as the stars faded and the morning came, Kulumi realized with horror that he had left his caged bird behind. "We must all go back together," suggested one of the boys, though all of them were afraid. "No," said Kulumi. "It is all my fault. I must go alone. Don't worry, I'll be back." "But what will happen to us if we lose the chief's last son?" wailed the other 6 boys. "Watch my spear," said Kulumi, planting his assegai firmly in the ground. "If it stands still, I am safe. If it shakes, you will know I am in danger. If it falls, I am dead." He ran back into the forest. The sun was high in the sky when the 6 boys saw the spear tremble, then steady itself, tremble again, and bend, before steadying, tremble a third time and shake and almost fall, and then stand still once more. As they breathed a sigh of relief that all seemed to be well, there was Kulumi beside them, with the cage and the bird in his hand. "What happened?" they cried. Breathlessly, Kulumi told them how he had met an old woman fetching water beside a waterfall. Her water pot was heavy, so he stopped to help her. "Where are you going so fast?" she asked him, and he told her, "You are brave." She chuckled and then gave him some meaty fat in a little wooden bowl. When he reached the cannibal's hut, he was horrified to see 4 of them rejoicing over whatever or whoever was roasting over the fire. So he slipped inside the hut, found the little cage, and the bird wobbled softly, as if glad to be with him. Then he made ready to run. As he was escaping, the cannibals saw him in the firelight. Quickly, as the old woman had instructed him, he rubbed some of the meat fat on a stone. When the cannibals rushed up, each one wanted the stone. One said, "It is mine," and swallowed it. Immediately the rest attacked him and ate him. Then they started running after Kulumi once more. Twice more, as they caught up with him, he had done the same thing and left the cannibals quarreling and feasting behind him in their horrid manner. "So that is why your assegai trembled those 3 times, exclaimed one of the boys. "But you said there were 4 cannibals," worried another. "If they stopped 3 times to eat one of their gang, there must still be one left alive." And at that moment, the remaining cannibal sprang into the clearing with a bloodthirsty roar. He was huge and hairy and horrible, but he was heavy with all that he had eaten, and no match for 7 boys and 7 assegais. It was Kulumi's own sharp blade which finally killed him. For 7 long days, the chief had sat gazing into the distance towards the cliffs of the fallen goats, where his last son had gone adventuring. The sun was already gathering red clouds around it when he heard a shout from his induna, Mbata. "I see 7 figures in Kosi, and they come running," said Mbata with joy in his heart. Across the valley came the cry, "It is I, your youngest son Kulumi, who speaks with a new name. We bring with us the 7 beautiful birds, and what is more, I bring my voice." The chief's kraal was filled with the sound of shouting and laughter as all his people rushed out to greet the boys. The noise stilled with wonder as they saw each boy standing behind his bird cage, set out in a line across the path. Kulumi bowed politely to his father and then ran along the line, cutting open the cages with his assegai. From each arose not a bird, but a tall young man. The 7 lost sons had come to life again. That night, the valley was loud with rejoicing, and the chief's long sorrow was turned to joy. So as you guys know, with these stories are from a different set of people. You know, each story is from a different set of people on the continent. And after the story, the writers did this interesting thing where they will break down some of the elements of the story. They'll talk about, the people, or they'll talk about something that the people did in the story, right? Or they'll talk about the animals, or something of that nature. And again, this is the basis of the work that I've been doing, and I'm going to soon put out for you guys, breaking down these stories and showing you how these stories could be the basis of curriculum for early learners, right? So again, this story, the seven magic birds, is a Zulu story. And so at the end of the story now, that we're gonna learn something interesting about the Zulu, I presume. So the rolling valleys of KwaZulu-Natal was settled over 1,000 years ago by Nguni-speaking tribes, probably originating from Zimbabwe. In the early 19th century, the great military commander Shaka made his tiny Zulu clan into a powerful kingdom. Today, almost all the black peoples of Natal, numbering some 7 million, refer to themselves as Zulu. They believe that a powerful force, Kulunkulu, which means great one, watches over them. Their Zulu folk tales remain one of the richest sources of traditional storytelling in Africa. And so here is where I say the basis of the work that we should be doing now for this curriculum lies, right? Is this type of story and the afterword of the story that you can build, a lot of our curriculum for early learners. I see in the chat room, Derico Kubu Photography is here saying, peace family, peace to you. Life with Nelly is here saying, good evening. Derico reminds you, hit the like button, show your attendance, right? Right now we have equal likes and equal concurrent viewers, so that's nice. For those of you who haven't subscribed yet, make sure you subscribe and click the bell to be notified when I'm doing something, uploading content or going live on this channel. How'd you guys feel about that first story? How did you guys feel about that first story? While you guys answer that question, I'll just go on to the next story. But I think that was a pretty neat story. And again, I think there's something that we can learn about the Zulu people in that story. The next story is the Wagtail's necklace. Again, post your comments about how you felt about that reading of the or that story, I should say, and I'll read it live on the air. The Wagtail's necklace. The wagtail is one of our prettiest and most delicate birds, which has lived alongside man for many generations. The Bushmen loved this bird too. This was long before the remains of their people were forced into their present desert way of life in the Kalahari or the Namib. The friendship began long ago when the Bushmen lived in the Cape in low caves with rocky walls and sandy floors. The steep rocky sides of the Cloof sheltered them from the biting winds of winter and the scorching heat of the summer sun. These Kloofs also held water, and in this dry land, it was good to have a constant water supply flowing by your door. So the Bushmen people lived in the Cape Mountains, hunting and gathering roots, fruits, and berries, talking and dancing and singing and painting. They were a happy people and very content with their homes and surroundings. Then one day the sandflies came, thousands of them, tens of thousands, millions, breeding by the running water, burrowing into the sandy floors of the caves, biting men, women, and children, spreading suffering, pain, and disease. The Bushmen could do nothing. The sandflies multiplied and multiplied until whole valleys were plagued by them. The Bushmen held council and decided to move all the caves. Decided to move. All the caves were emptied of their scanty belongings. Weapons, tools, cooking utensils were packed, and everyone was ready to leave. They intended to march out along the valley of the Olifants River into the vast Karoo. Their leader was making a speech explaining to all why they must leave and trying to prepare them for the hardships which he knew lay ahead. Then he stopped talking and looked up into the bright blue sky with amazement. A large black cloud was speeding rapidly towards where they were standing. Everyone watched in wonder and felt afraid. Then as the cloud began to echo with sound, they realized it was a flock of birds. These birds were small and delicate, with long tails, which jerked up and down as they walked. Their backs were gray-brown, and their chests and outer tail feathers were white. The whole tribe watched in amazement as the birds settled by the running water and took over the kloof. They had made a long journey, and they were very, very hungry. The sandflies were just what they wanted. In their hundreds, they attacked the stream and the caves and the ground around the caves. For 3 days, they gobbled and pecked as the bushmen looked on in amazement. By the end of that time, there was not a single sandfly to be seen. Then the flock flew away as quickly as it had arrived, leaving behind them just one pair of birds. The cloud of tail-wagging birds continued on its journey, and everywhere it settled, in every kloof, by every pond, by every stream, one pair stayed behind. So that was how the wagtails, as we call them now, came to live all over our land. It was a miracle, and the bushmen were overjoyed at being able to remain in their homes. To show their gratitude, they decided to honor the wagtails. But how does one honor a bird? The bushmen had no medals of honor and very little jewelry. Women and children wore necklaces made from small pieces of ostrich eggshell. So it was decided that the women would make a similar necklace for the wagtail and his wife. This was soon done, and everyone was delighted. But of course it did not work. The necklace was too heavy for the birds. It caught in the bushes and once even broke in flight and was lost. The wagtails were upset and the bushmen were upset. They wanted to show their gratitude to these birds, but how? For long nights they sat in their caves and talked of nothing else. What could they do? There was one bushman who lived in a high cave overlooking the kloof, and he was a great artist. He painted in brown, orange, and black paintings of man, lion, springbok, birds, insects, and plants. His work was as beautiful in its delicacy and charm as any painting you have seen. Why not? Said one of the eldest bushmen. Ask one of the artists to paint a necklace onto the wagtail and his wife. Everyone agreed with enthusiasm. The artist was approached and the problem explained. Gladly, he mixed a rich gray black and painted a dark choker necklace on the white chest of the birds. It looked beautiful. The bushmen loved it and the wagtails loved it. Mother Nature looked down from her seat above the great karoo, and she loved it too. She decided there and then that the collar would forever be the sign of man's gratitude to the wagtail, a symbol for all the help the wagtail gives in controlling insect pests. And from that day to this, wagtails have always worn a dark gray choker necklace. Next time that you see a Cape wagtail, have a careful look at him. He never goes anywhere without his necklace. So that brings us to the end of the story, and they're going to talk to us about rock paintings. Rico Cooper Photography says, interesting. Got me thinking about that second prompt. Yes, that's what I couldn't help but think about. And that second prompt was initiated by a revolutionary matron. That second prompt was on my mind during the whole reading. By the way, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you'll see at the top of the chat or in the description a link to join our Discord server. On the Discord server, we have a creatives corner where I've posted these two prompts. One I came up with, one revolutionary matron came up with. The one that revolutionary matron came up with was on my mind while reading this last story. It's kind of like a creation story, like an origin story of things. So go now onto the Discord and check out that, the creative corner. By the way, while I have your attention about Creative Corner, I was gonna do this on the Discord, but I'll do it here. I want to bring out a call to action. The call to action is that you add anyone who's on the Discord adds one black woman and one artist to the Discord. Add one black woman and one artist to the Discord. That's the call to action currently. One black woman, one black creative. And if the black woman is a creative, then you've done the two things at once. All right. But let's talk about these rock paintings that they mentioned in the story that I just read. So you see that image right there, an actual image. There are over 15,000 sites in Southern Africa where such paintings like the one you see on the screen right now have been found. The oldest in Namibia, maybe as old as 27,000 years, though most were probably painted within the last 2,000 years. The Cloofs of the Cape Mountains, the Cedarburg and the Baviaans Kloof in particular, have many caves with beautiful paintings on their walls and ceilings. The Bushmen lived in the mountains for centuries until the spread of European civilization destroyed their old way of life. Now, again, isn't that a good story for our young learners to get? Isn't that a good story for our young learners to read and then in their English or writing classes to write about? Right, to write about the Bushmen, or to write about the, or in history class to talk about the paintings, or in art class to study the paintings up closer, etc., etc., etc. Right? Isn't that a good way of getting our people immersed in African tradition? Right? And that's all you really need. You don't have to worry about if your ancestorship came from these Bushmen or the Zulus. The idea is that you're immersing yourself in African tradition. That's the idea, right? You're connecting yourself, right, with your African past, right? Let's go to the next story. The rainbow is the next story. The chat room is kind of quiet. That's fine, but hey, you guys have the opportunity to discuss concepts in the stories that I'm reading. You could discuss things that were interesting to you, like Derico Cooper talked about. The second prompt came to mind during that story. So feel free to have a conversation about the stories, as I'm reading it. The rainbow. There was drought upon the land. The clouds that carried the rain sailed high above, not seeming to notice the suffering of Africa. No fruits, no fodder, and hardly anything to drink. But there came a day when this rain sniffed at the scents of the earth and sensed the enticing fragrance of a young woman. He looked down on her. She had skin as shining as wet rock, and hair as dark as dew-moist berries. And the rain desired her. So the rain made himself into the shape of a bull, though he had the thoughts of a man. On the shaft of lightning, the great rainbow came down from the sky, and he trod the earth like rippling thunder. He stood by the low hut where the young woman slept, and the place became misty with his breath, like a cloud heavy with moisture. The sweet smell of rain filled the hut, and the young woman woke. She watched as the rainbow laid his ears back, lowered his lashing tail, and bent his forelegs to kneel before her. Who is this? She said to herself. Is he man or bull? So as there seemed to be magic at work, she took up some twigs of buchu, for its fine aromatic leaves have a magic of their own. Buchu soothes and calms. Perhaps it would have the same calming effect on the rainbow. She gathered up her karos made of soft skins and covered herself with it, tying it around her body. As the rainbow came to her, she could smell only the strong bull sweat of desire. She pressed Buchu on the hard forehead between the bull's curving horns, and she tried to push him away. The rainbow stamped his hoof, and the earth rumbled with thunder. He wanted to take the young woman away, and it was clear that she not wished to accompany him. His eyes were dark and clouded, but the strange charm of the Buchu was starting to work. He stamped his hoof again, unsure of what to do next. The young woman was wise. She did not wish to make him angry. Somewhere behind the bull's shape and the man's mind, she caught the sweet smell of rain, and she knew that any hope of rain must be welcomed with love. So as he stood there, shaking his great head in frustration, she smiled and climbed up on his back. The rain bull trotted away, and the sound of his hooves was like rain pattering on dry ground. Across the veld, he went with her, trotting towards the far distant mountains where the rain comes from. When they left behind the dryness, the stones, and the parched sand, she saw a single keprosol tree spreading its shady leaves. "My bones ache from riding on your back," she called to the rainbow. "Wherever it is you are taking me, I shall never be able to please you when I get there. Let me take some rest. There is a cool shade under that tree. Let us stop there." So the rainbow walked beneath the keprosol tree and stopped. The young woman slipped down from his back. In a concealing shade, she reached under her kaross and took out a sprig of Buchu. The rainbow arched his back with pleasure as the young woman started to stroke his neck, though in truth, she was rubbing it with Buchu. The fragrant scent crept into his nostrils and drowsed his senses. So it was the rainbow, not the young woman, who settled down to sleep. At first, the woman was frightened at what she had done. She climbed into the tree to find safety. But as the rainbow slept on, she felt her courage return, and she climbed softly down again and ran away back to her own village. The rainbow awoke in the cool of the evening. There was no smell of bull or man, only the fresh green scent of the Buchu leaves. Hold on, I just messed up. He forgot that he had been courting the young woman, and he remembered only the rain. So it was the rain that fell lightly on the thirsty earth, and rain that brought new life to the grazing plants, and life-giving rain that filled up the empty water holes. People were glad, for there was water to drink. All admired the young woman. She had not angered the rainbow when he was a man, but she had not given herself to him either. They looked everywhere for her in order to sing her praises, but she was not with them. She was inside her hut, rubbing her body with Buchu to take away the scent of the bull until all that remained was the sweet smell of the rain. Right? So that story ends there, and it's going to describe to us Bushmen of today. The San, so this story is from the San people, I guess. The San were among the earliest inhabitants of southern Africa. They're sometimes called Bushmen, but neither of these are the words they use to name themselves. Each group has its own name, seldom known to the white or black settlers who drove them from their lands in KwaZulu-Natal and the Cape into the deserts of Namibia and Botswana, where they live today. They are unable to survive by hunting and gathering in the small areas left open to them, and have adopted to some aspects of modern life, such as handling four-wheel drive vehicles and operating solar-driven water pumps, as well as keeping some cattle and growing vegetables. The women still gather bush food and the men still hunt, but the well-known old-style picture of these people is long gone. Their children, however, are learning the education they need to go forward into the 20th century civilization. All right. What are your thoughts on that story, guys? You guys who are live with me today, what are your thoughts on that story? All right. Post your thoughts. I'll read them on air. In the meantime, I'll move on to the next story. Renier and the Thundertops. Renier and the Thundertops. It sounds like it might be somewhat European. Let's see how it goes. Renier de Winard, living on the slopes of the Kohlsberg near today's town of Zastron, and he was the best storyteller in the whole of the Free State. If Renier had not told the stories he did, we might never have known why there is a hole in the Asvolberg, or why so many of the hills around Zastron have flat tops. According to him, both were the results of minor differences of opinion between Renier and the devil. So, you know, right there, once you hear the devil talk, this is probably a South African story by these Afrikaans, but we'll see what it offers. Storytelling brings long life. I want y'all to pay attention to that statement right there. Storytelling brings long life. This is why we got to tell stories. This is why we have to write stories. Because those stories will live on when we're gone, right? This is me talking, it's not the story. But that line is an important line, and we have to understand that, right? Storytelling brings long life, according to the folk of Zastron, which must be why Renier de Winard lived to the ripe old age of 102. There was one particular day when Renier was fishing. It was a great way to pass the time, lying back with a pipe in one hand and a bottle beside him, watching the clouds go past. He was there often, so the clouds came to know him quite well. Day after day, they had watched him glugging back the liquid in his long dark bottle, and they became quite jealous. Whatever it was, it smelled strong and appeared to taste even stronger. "Hey man," they called down, "what are you drinking there? Give us a taste." Renier looked up at the white-headed thunderclouds. "No, there's not enough for all of us," he shouted. "I wet my throat, you wet yours," and he laughed as he tipped the last of the clear brown liquid down his throat. Up in the sky, the Thundertops were angry. Certainly they were able to wet their own throats with a few others as well. They weren't going to be selfish. They glanced down at Renier, who was stretched out and had his hat pulled over his face, and they scurried away on their own mischievous business. If Renier had been awake, he might have heard a sound like great barrels of drink being trundled across the sky. He might have seen sparks and flashes of hidden laughter from the Thundertops. But alas, adding a whole bottle of drink to the excitement of fishing had sent him fast to sleep. While he snored, things were happening. He didn't realize how the clouds had got their own back until he was woken by what felt like a barrel of water being tipped over him. A great gale of laughter swept across the sky. "Taste this," rumbled a voice. Then came another torrent of water and more thunderous mirth. Renier grabbed his rod, his pipe, and his sodden hat and started to run home. But there was no avoiding the Thundertops and their sense of humor. By the time he reached home, he was soaked to the skin. He shook his fist at the sky while the clouds were tumbling over each other with high delight. Old Renier de Winard wasn't going to be beaten by a bunch of fluffy clouds. The next day he sorted out a generous twist of his best tobacco grown on his own farm. Then he climbed the hillside to a cave where a dust devil lived. It was a mischievous dust devil, this one, and it liked nothing better than to play tricks on people as it whirled and swirled around the Free State fields. "Morning, Dusty," called Renier loudly as he finally reached the cave. "Are you looking for a bit of fun today?" The dust devil woke with a start, choked and spluttered, and nearly suffocated the old man in swirling dust. "Calm down," said Renier. "See here, I brought you a pipe full of my best tobacco. It's yours if you agree to join me in my little plan." The fragrance of the tobacco was too tempting. The dust devil coiled himself neatly and agreed to listen. As Renier told it about the rude, rough joking of the Thundertops, the dust devil liked the plan more and more. It had disliked the high-flown clouds for years and years. They had a habit of looking down on it in the most unfriendly fashion. "Just you wait until tomorrow," were Renier's last words to the dust devil. "I will go fishing again, and together we'll give those clouds quite a different view of things." Once again, Renier sat himself down by the river in the lovely warm sunshine. For a long while, the sky above him stayed blue and bright. But as he waved his bottle around, the light glinted on the glass. He thought he could actually see a few little inquisitive wisps of cloud. He glanced across the valley to where the dust devil was lurking, like a thin trail of smoke, and he winked his eye. The smoke quivered. Apparently uninterested, a white-headed thundercloud sailed into view. Then two more, followed by a general gathering of thundertops. Distant rumble in the air sounded just a little like a water barrel being rolled into readiness. So Renier took off his straw hat and waved it about. Up in the air soared the dust devil. All the sandy dust, choking ashes, and crumbling mud from the valley floor was swept up with it. The large white thundertops were bumped around the blue sky and completely smothered with dirt. Their laughter choked into gritty growls, and their feeble attempts to rain produced only a few muddy drops and dribbles. The clouds fled, and the dust devil chased them with delight into the heights of the Malati Mountains, way away in Lesotho. There was no laughter left in the sky, but there was plenty down at the ground level. Old Renier de Winner rolled around, hugging himself and howling in glee until tears rolled off his cheeks and made muddy puddles of their own. The story could have ended there, but it seems the Thundertops were mighty offended by the way they had been treated. They stayed away from that corner of the Free State for weeks on end. The sun shone from an endlessly clear sky without a drop of rain. Renier had stopped laughing long ago. His farm was parched, his cattle thirsty, and even his favorite fishing spot was a dried up pool of mud. The other folk of the valley were suffering as well. It was time he apologized. One Sunday morning after church, the faintest whisper of cloud peeped down to see old man de Winner staggering towards the riverbank with a small, heavy barrow. Two other barrows were already there, with their tops open and a heavenly smell of something rich and brown and delicious. He cocked an ear and listened. Was that a tiny, distant twitch of thunder he heard? "Listen up there," he shouted. "You win, and I'm sorry. How about having a drink together to show that friends are still friends, eh?" Well, the Thundertops really began massing overhead at that point. The white clouds swept close to the ground, and it might have been tears of gratitude which brought light rain pattering gently on the earth. But Renier had gone too far, as he usually did. Whatever he had put in those 3 barrels was far too strong for the Thundertops. They went on a 3-day storming party. Lightning leapt about in a drunken fashion, thunder staggered from hill to hill, and the rain fell helplessly everywhere. For once in his life, Renier didn't mind getting soaked. The valley needed that rain badly. But when it was all over, the clouds made a habit of sailing past with their heads even more in the air. Visit Zastron yourself. You'll find that they still do. Renier de Winner didn't mind that either. He got on with his fishing and his storytelling in peace. So the afterword is about the Caledon River Valley. So again, it's a geography study that comes up at the end of this story that we read. If Renier de Winner, who in fact really lived from 1781 to 1883, had journeyed towards Bloemfontein, he would have crossed the Caledon River. This river still continues to divide the Free State from Lesotho to this day. Its fertile grazing lands were a source of constant squabbles between the Boer farmers and the Basotho. Fascinating things such as dinosaur bones, rock paintings, mission stations, and tales of scary cannibals can be found around Zastron and Ladybrand, and thundertop clouds often form overhead. Right? I seem to have put the chat room to sleep. I'm curious to know what do you guys think of this story as well. What do you guys think of this story as well? I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll take a quick station ID break, and on the other side, I'll come back with some other African myths and legends, right? I'll be right back.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure you guys check out the other shows on KWAZ Radio. Make sure you check out the other shows on KWAZ Radio. Make sure you subscribe to this channel, the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Also, join the Discord. The link is right there pinned in the chat. It's also in the description of this episode. Right? When you join the Discord, there's a lot of things you can be involved in. You could be involved in the curriculum building. You could be, if you're creative and you want to join in with us in writing short stories, you can do that. There's a lot of investment tips. If you're a black woman, there are other black women in a sisters only section of the Discord where you can build with other conscious black women. You know, so by the way, I gotta check in with the sisters and see how that's going. But I saw Revolutionary Matron here earlier. She could let me know how that's going. So yeah, so make sure to check out all the things that's associated with the Bitter Medicine Podcast. We're also on social media. You could follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Lastly, I usually don't even talk about it because honestly I forget. I want to thank all of you who have donated to the Cash App in the past week. The Cash App is $BitterMeds, BITTERMEDZ. Thank those of you who donated in the last week. We're near the goal of being able to put the show back on the podcast apps out there, back on SoundCloud. So you guys, if you can and when you can donate to that cause, get the show back on all the podcasting apps, right? Okay, I'm gonna read another story for you guys. This one is called The Killers of Prinzloo, Cloof. The Killers of Prinzloo, Cloof. The baboons looked down from their rocks and chattered nervously. Humans were returning to the lonely valley which the baboons hoped had been deserted forever. Stephen Goodrick rode his horse with pride. Behind him, on horses and in trundling wooden wagons, were his wife, his children, servants, and belongings. Ahead of him, sheltered in the folds of the Koga Mountains, was the farm he had bought only a month before, in September 1860. He rode back to the first wagon where his wife sat beside the driver. "See," he told her with a dramatic wave of his arm, "Prinzloo's Cloof is ahead of us now. There's the farm with its stone house and corral. On the slope behind is where we shall plant our orchard. Isn't it a picture? and I bought it so cheap, a real bargain. Van der Meulen seemed in such a hurry to leave that he threw in the cattle and goats with the price of the farm. He's a kind man. So again, this seems like another South African story, right? Actually, one of those Afrikaner stories, right? His wife remained tight-lipped and said absolutely nothing. In her own experience, a bargain price often hid something else. The Goodrick family was welcomed to Prinzloo's Cloof by an old farm worker named Cupido. Brown and wrinkled, he could have been one of the Khoi who had lived there for hundreds of years. He helped them move furniture into the sturdy farmhouse and tended to the tired horses in the stables beside the stone wall corral. Stephen hugged his wife for joy before they fell into an exhausted sleep. They were woken by something like a scream from the dark. Stephen looked out the window. His horses were neighing with fright. Taking his gun, he went outside, but the farm seemed empty of any intruders under the cold midnight moon. Next day, the sun shone, and Stephen was too busy on the farm to worry. His wife liked her new home, and her children happily explored the streams and slopes of Prinzloo's Cloof. The family celebrated Christmas with delight. The new year of 1861 was greeted as the beginning of their new farm life. Then came a hot summer night when the horses were frightened once more. Exactly the same thing happened the following night and the next. Each time Stephen swore he had heard a scream, and the horses went mad with fear, sweating and stamping. He questioned Cupido, and the old man shook his head but would not look him in the eye. The next evening, Stephen sat on his stoep with his dog beside him and his gun in his hand. He sent his wife and his children to bed and watched the stars light up the valley that was his. Perhaps he had been dozing when his dog pushed a nervous snout against his hand. Stephen looked up and saw a figure with a wide-brimmed hat slip into the shadows by the corral. The horses neighed with terror and galloped wildly into a corner of the corral. Stephen ran towards them, saw the figure again, and fired both barrels at point-blank range. The intruder turned towards him, apparently unharmed. Stephen saw the old-fashioned clothes, the bony shoulders, and most of all, the pale, waxy face of a man who was long dead. Then the figure vanished, and Stephen's dog, who was usually so daring and brave, was whimpering at his side, quivering with fear. The next day, on the 15th of January 1861, was hot and humid. The thunder clouds growled past. As the sun dipped behind the dark-shaded mountains, Cupido came to the farmhouse door. He said he was a little frightened of the coming storm and asked if he could sleep in the farmhouse that night instead of his own lonely cottage. Stephen's wife agreed. Suddenly at midnight, the kloof glared white with lightning, while thunder crashed around the farm. Stephen woke with a start and heard on the driving wind shouts and yells and the same wild scream that he had heard night after night. The farmhouse door was open and old Cupido was standing outside, shaking with fear and his eyes staring. "Who is it?" asked Stephen. Cupido trembled. "It is Dianne Prinzloo," he stammered. "It is his night. Those who killed him are coming up the kloof. You can hear them now. Shut the door, Mr. Goodrick. Lock it, and whatever you do, do not look out of the windows." But Stephen ran outside, gun in hand, and his wife followed. The thunderstorm had moved away, and moonlight shafted down through the clouds to light up the corral. There they saw the same man Stephen had seen the night before, carrying an old flintlock musket. He was screaming in rage and fear, for he was being chased by 6 others who were armed with spears and knives. He used the musket like a club, but his attackers closed in, shouting and shrieking to kill him and hack his body to pieces, and all 6 were fleshless ghosts. Stephen clutched at his wife as she fainted with shock. A last growl of thunder rolled. Dark clouds covered the moon. The stone-walled corral was silent and empty once more. Next day, over many cups of coffee on the sunlit stope, Cupido told them the story of Dianne Prinzloo. Dianne Prinzloo came to this deserted kloof because he was already known as a dangerous lawbreaker. On his new farm, he treated his servants, some local Khoi, some from Mozambique, worse than slaves. His final deed was to fly into a drunken rage when he discovered that two of the women with one of their children had gone visiting without his permission. When they returned, he roped them to a tree and flogged them mercilessly with a jambok. Then he took his musket and shot both women and the child dead. Okay, this is an interesting turn. During the night, all the servants left him, and Dianne Prinzloo lived alone on the farm for a while. Then on the 15th of January, 7 of them returned. Craftily, they cornered Prinzloo in the corral. He had shot one of them with his musket when the others closed in on him, giving him no time to reload. They chased him around the corral and caught him near the stables. As he screamed and screamed, they cut off his arms, legs, and head. Then they took everything of value from the house and fled. Cupido looked sideways at them. That is what my father told me. He was a boy at the time. Many people have tried to live here since, but they always leave. Will Mr. Goodrick be staying? No, said Stephen, after a long look at his wife's face. I don't think this is the sort of home where we want to bring up our children. So they packed up and left, and the farm in Prinzloo's Cloof is now broken stone overgrown with grass. The baboons go there often. Right? The baboons go there often. By the way, there's an interesting part to that story there. In that story, they talk about, basically this is a story of retribution and a story of our ancestors haunting these folks for what they've done. And in that story, you'll notice that when the 7 people came back to get at this fella for doing what he did to those women and children, if you notice, someone got shot of the 7. Notice the remaining 6 didn't run away. Right? That's that African spirit. The remaining 6 understood, okay, you might get one of us, but you ain't gonna have time to get all of us. And that's a spirit that we need to have today. In fact, I was talking about these so-called street dudes that we have in black society who don't do nothing but just harass your own people, right? These are guys who are supposed to carry out the similar type of retribution that you heard in that story. They're supposed to be carrying that out. You're already out here doing shit. Take one for the team. Go back and carry out that the needed retribution, right? And show these folks who would be out here harming our people, harming our kids in particular, that there will be retribution. And you might take one of us out in the process. That ain't nothing. We will fight for the people, right? So I want folks to pick up that little bit in the in that story. I also want to say this too. When I started the series of reading these African myths and legends, the first part of this book was really dope in terms of it being like, you know, more, I guess you could say, Black African centered, right? More about different tribes and groupings of African people. The last couple stories I've read in the book, as you can tell, seem to talk more about the white folks who came and settled in South Africa, right? The Afrikaners and stuff. And so that kind of, rubs me a little wrong. But even in that story just now, there's something to take from that we need to get back to. There is also an afterword for this story called the Baviaans Cloof, which is some type of Dutch Dane word, right? The name means ravine of baboons, but the baboons no longer have it to themselves. This valley now contains several farms and a forestry station. The rough, twisting road leads an adventurous traveler over narrow passes, past breathtaking precipices, and through beautiful flower-filled landscapes. More than 170 kilometers long, the Baviane's Cloof stretches from near Willowmore in the Little Karoo to the Cougar Mountains, containing Prinzloo's Cloof, around the wiser, more welcoming Gamtoos Valley near Port Elizabeth. So again, the young learners will learn their geography from a story like this, right? In learning about the terrain and the geographic location in their writing classes, they get to write about it, right? Again, we're talking about folks in South Africa, right? They get to study the language, learning how to count 1 to 20 or what have you, right? In the language of this region. So again, this is how these stories play out in terms of helping us create this African-centered or Pan-African-centered curriculum. All right. Should I read another story? Should I read another story? Asked Koku to himself. You know what? I'll read one more story, and then I'll call that an episode. This next story is called The Flying Dutchman. Captain, so again, this is more Africana type stuff, which I'll read it. And the next time I do these stories, I think I might go back to Carter G. Woodson's book to read these stories in the next time I do it. Captain Hendrik van der Decken stood arrogantly on the high deck at the stern of the Flying Dutchman. The crew feared him. He was a cruel lion of a man. His long hair flowed out from under his three-cornered hat like a tawny mane, and his eyes had the hard, cold glare of the king of beasts. He worked his crew mercilessly, but the pay they earned was good. No captain in the Dutch trading fleet could deliver a cargo more swiftly, whatever the weather. He would chain and padlock the ropes controlling the sails to stop his crew from lowering any of the sails, however fiercely the storm howled. Any passengers were locked below the decks while he chased the hurricanes to speed his ship. So his cargoes traveled fast and fetched good prices in Amsterdam, in the East Indies, and in Table Bay. The Flying Dutchman was of unusual design. She was heavily built and curiously curved at the bow to cut the water more cleanly. Heavy square sails overlapped on each mast. 8 brass cannon guarded her yellow-topped hull with its black sides below. Many a time had she fought her way through the Cape, with full sail set on her 3 tall masts. Vanderdecken watched the cargo going ashore to please the good burghers of Cape Town. Spices from Batavia to liven their cooking, silks from Cathay to adorn their ladies, planks of satinwood and bulks of ivory. He fretted and cursed at the time it took. He was only happy out at sea, proving himself the master of wind and water. You see how white folks think of themselves as master of their environment, right? Above him, the bulk of the Table Mountain swirled with cloud. Vanderdecken laughed. The storm giant, Adam Mastor, had long been his foe. Already the bay looked angry and the waves were threatening. The Flying Dutchman rolled restlessly as his seamen sweated. Vanderdecken had given his ship the same sense of urgency. "Close the hatches," he yelled suddenly. "Let loose. Man the yards. Helmsman, we sail." "But there's a storm brewing," pleaded the mate. "Tomorrow's Easter," said another. "Let them keep Easter in church," roared Vanderdecken. We sail storm or no storm. So the frightened seamen climbed high on the swaying mast to set full sail as their captain demanded. The ship plunged its foredeck repeatedly into the beating sea. Even Vanderdecken had an uneasy feeling that this was a storm beyond any he had faced before. But that was even more reason to defeat it. Again, there's a psychology here, right? A sail split with a crack and fragments whipped away in the ferocious wind. Water flooded the decks. For hours and days they fought to round the Cape of Storms, but the wind and waves threw his ship back every time. His crew begged him, this once, to run before the storm to save their lives. One seaman dared to kneel before him and pray for mercy. Vanderdecken seized the man, and with a string of fearful oaths, he hurled him into the sea. Then he lashed himself to the wheel to prevent being washed overboard and headed the Flying Dutchman back into the hurricane. Never, ranted Vanderdecken, wild with a spirit of madness. Nor man, nor giant, nor God himself will make me change my mind. I'll round the Cape if I sail till the day of doom. Then, in an instant, the wind died down. A shaft of hard white light lit up the deck. A ghostly figure suddenly appeared, and the men shielded their eyes in fear. Was it the storm giant, Adamastor, or was it actually God himself? Even Captain Vanderdecken was scared for a moment. Then he pulled out a pistol from his belt and fired at the figure. It was a foolish thing to do. His arm fell by his side, withered and useless. The foremast snapped and crashed to the deck. A voice louder than the storm had been proclaimed. You have named your own fate. You shall indeed sail these seas until the day of doom. Lightning crackled, the sails shuddered, the ship glowed blood red. His crew lay round him, every man dead. As Vanderdecken stared, the flesh melted off his bones, leaving only whitened skeletons on the deck. No longer a mortal man, Vanderdecken sailed into the darkening storm. So, as legend has it, from that day onwards, the Flying Dutchman has sailed out of master's stormy seas, forever trying to round the Cape of Good Hope, but doomed never to succeed. Many ships through the years have claimed to have seen the ghost vessel. A red glow in the sea mist is the first sign, they say. Next comes the phantom shape of an old three-masted ship with full sail set. Some say they have heard the anchor chains rattling and a boat being lowered across the water. Letters, a desperate voice cries. Letters, a desperate voice cries, for our families in Amsterdam. But woe betide any ship that dares linger to take these ghostly messages, for their ship is bound to meet with disaster. The most famous person to be linked with this legend was a midshipman aboard HMS Bashanti named George, then Prince of Wales, later to be King George V. He wrote in his diary, July 11th, 1881, at 4 a.m., the Flying Dutchman crossed our bows. The ship's log recorded. She first appeared as a strange red light, as of a ship all aglow, in the midst of which light her masts, spars, and sails stood out in strong relief as she came up. When the Bashanti reached the spot some 200 meters away, there was no sign of any ship. The sea was empty to the floor horizon. In the early morning, the logbook said the sea was strangely calm. Later that morning, the seaman who had first reported the phantom vessel fell screaming from the crow's nest at the top of the mast and was killed instantly. It seemed that the Flying Dutchman had claimed another member of her ghostly crew. In 1939, hundreds of people on the beach in False Bay swore that they saw an old-fashioned sailing ship headed towards Muizenberg. It was puzzling, for there was no wind. Just as it seemed that the ship would run into the breakers at Strands Fontaine, it vanished. Many that day were convinced that they too had sighted the Flying Dutchman. Watch carefully when you visit the Cape. Who knows what ship you might spy? All right. So this is clearly an Africana story that's, set around the continent. I wouldn't really call this an African myth or legend for that matter, but this story has an afterword that talks about the Flying Dutchman in literature. A ghostly ship with a ghostly crew. In Tempest, she appears, right? The poet Longfellow, who wrote these words, were fascinated by the legend of this ghostly ship. So Walter Scott's poem, what's that say? Rokeby, tells of a Flying Dutchman cursed by murder, piracy, and plague. The most famous version is Wagner's opera, whatever that is, Der Fliegen Holländer, in which the ill-fated captain is at least allowed to come ashore every 7th year to woo for a wife in vain. Was that a part of the story of Pirates of the Caribbean? Was that a part? Was that mixed in there? Was that mixed in there? In the chat room, Dorico Cooper Photography says, I like the short story format. It reminds me of Tales from the Hood, or at least that is what these stories trigger in my mind. Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. Dorico Cooper has been the only person really commenting on the story, but I'm glad you see it that way. And again, I hope you guys also see that there's a power in short stories and telling stories, especially in short format. Because in short stories, it's easier to access the information, and it's easier to transmit it and pass it down from generation to generation. Like I said, I'm gonna look at the remaining stories in this book. If you want this book, I think it's on the Discord. If it's not, DM me, I'll gladly give it to you. I'm gonna look at the remaining stories in this book. I have a feeling that these remaining stories might be all South African stories, but I'm telling you, if you go back to the first story readings that I did, go back to those episodes. In fact, what I'll do is at the end of this episode on YouTube, I'll link those earlier readings. The stories were really more African, Black African stories that our spirit could resonate with better. The next time I do this reading, as I said before, I'll read from Carter G. Woodson's book. A lot of people don't know Carter G. Woodson has a book on African stories. In fact, as you guys might remember, if you were here when I was doing the first set of readings, I didn't realize, because I have the book in physical form. I have a physical form of the book, and what threw me off about it, and I know this might sound weird, is they put Carter G. Woodson's name. Like, they put his full name. Like, I'm used to saying Carter G. Woodson, right? But on the book, the author is said to be Carter Godwin Woodson, and for whatever reason, I just didn't put it together, right? So I think I'll pull a Carter G. Woodson book the next time I do readings like this, which I'm almost certain won't have a bunch of Afrikaner type stories in that book. All right. I want to thank everyone who was here tonight, particularly Dorico Cooper Photography, for actually responding to the stories. Clearly, he's listening to the stories. I want to thank all of you who were here tonight. I want to remind you to join the Discord. Absolutely join the Discord. And if you're a creative or you want to be a creative type, you can join our creative corner, where we have these 2 story prompts right now. Let me read this. Let me read these story prompts for you, actually. Sometimes my Discord is slow to respond. I guess I have too much stuff going on. So it might take me a little second as I speak to you all here for it to unfreeze itself. Yeah, it's frozen. So I'm going to let it unfreeze itself. And then I'll go into the short stories. So, boom. So the first prompt reads, here we go with the freezing up again. The first prompt goes like this. You have to start the story with this. The Zulus watched a strange black man crawl out of the space pod, his arms shaking, his eyes wild. You have to end the story with, this black man had seen things the Zulu would never fully understand. So that's the start of, that's the exact start of the story, and that's the exact end. Right? I saw someone started writing that story, but they didn't use the exact start. You got to use the exact start and the exact end. Else, what's the point of having the prompt? Right? The second prompt, again, this prompt was brought to me by Revolutionary Matron. This story starts with, we are the beginning of the beginning, and we are one. And this second prompt has to end with, my child, this is how the world began. Also in these prompts, I don't know if folks on the Discord peeped it, but General Abzu came through, or Derico Cooper Photography in the chat, came through and added like soundtracks. I guess he was listening, thinking about the prompt, and he added these soundtracks that are pretty dope, especially in that first prompt. So you can actually sit and write to those prompts. So I want to thank Derico Cooper Photography for that. You can sit and write to those prompts, and I bet you it inspires you to write a good story. By the way, for those who have started writing on those prompts, if you go on the Discord, you'll see also on the Creative Corner, there's the submission rules, right? Make sure to follow those rules. Like there's a word count, a minimum, a maximum, and other things, right? And again, last thing I'll say about it, we do a bunch of these prompts, we select the best stories, we can put together a compendium of our own stories, right? We could put that together, put it out as a book. You see what I'm saying? And that's how we start to do things for ourselves that are reflective of our African ancestry, our African tradition, right? And our Pan-African thinking. All right, I've talked enough. I want to thank everyone who was here. Derico Cooper Photography was in the room. Life with Nelly was here. KW Dawn 7 was here. Kevin K 42 was here. Revolutionary Matron was here. NYC Beauties, Kevin K 42, NYC Sports Archives, and Black Excellence was here. Thank all of you for being here. I'll be back on Thursday. Once again, happy Africa Day to all of you. I'll see you guys on Thursday. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.